Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring you today's most pressing issues from across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol became the first sitting Korean president to ever be served with an arrest warrant. Just hours before, the CIO sought a warrant to formally arrest Yoon, hours before its initial 48-hour detainment deadline expires tonight. After being temporarily detained Tuesday, Yoon faced an intense grilling at the Corruption Investigation Office for high-ranking officials. But for the next 2 days, he refused to take part in any questioning over insurrection charges. The president's legal team filed a petition to the Seoul Central District Court to review the legality of his detention, but the court dismissed the challenge Thursday night, keeping him in custody. So what's next for President Yoon? And will the court give the green light for Yoon to be arrested? For more on this, we invite Cho Hee-kyung, professor of law at Hongik University. Welcome, Professor.
Hello, thanks for having me.
And also joining us is Jung W. Hwang, Chief Executive Officer at LawQuant LLC. Great to have you.
Thank you for having me as well.
So for the sake of our viewers who may not be following the current situation in Korea, let's circle back to Tuesday's temporary detention. So Yoon's arrest early Tuesday was broadcast live through major media outlets across the globe. Mr. Hwang, how did you see this? And could you remind us of the requirements for a temporary detention arrest?
Yeah, first of all, the temporary detention arrest is a very rare phenomenon. That's because usually you go for a permanent arrest warrant, not a temporary arrest warrant. What happens is that when the suspect is extremely uncooperative with the investigating body, that they'll actually try to bring him in, and you have the prosecutors have up to 48 hours to ask for the permanent arrest warrant. Now, what happened on Tuesday was quite remarkable. What we saw was the Presidential Security Service stand down. Most of the workers, most of the bodyguards within the service basically said, nope, we are not doing this. I mean, we defended President Yoon the first time around, but we thought better. We've been reviewing the legal issues, and it is not legal what we are doing. So we saw basically the bodyguards within the Presidential Security Service give up, and President Yoon having to just kind of, basically give up himself, even though he clearly didn't want to be brought in.
Mm-hmm. But on his first day, President Yoon exercised his right to remain silent, providing no answers, and reportedly declined to participate in questioning on Wednesday and Thursday. How should this situation be interpreted, Mr. Hwang?
Mm-hmm. I mean, in general, just as a strategy when you're facing a criminal charge, whether in any country actually, it's never really in your interest, especially if you have something to hide, to actually talk to the prosecutors. Basically, right to remain silent is guaranteed both in the Korean constitution and constitutions around, many countries around the world. So it is not really surprising to me that President Yoon is exercising his right to remain silent. At the same time, I mean, it is kind of striking that although his public statements seem to suggest that he's going to be very upfront and very verbal about why he declared martial law, what he has done now is actually kind of trying to take advantage of various legal technicalities. And I think that might actually look a little disappointing to many of his supporters.
Yes, it could be. Now to Professor Cho, Yoon's lawyers filed for a review of the legality of the warrant on Wednesday, which the court has turned down. For starters, could you tell us what is this petition or review? I hear it's not a very common request.
Not at all a common request. In fact, I understand that last year there were only 4 of such requests to review a temporary arrest warrant was made. It's rare because, first of all, temporary arrest warrants themselves are not that often issued. And secondly, excuse me, it's actually not to the advantage of the suspect to challenge the validity of the temporary arrest warrant, because a temporary arrest warrant is usually valid only for 48 hours. And if you challenge it, then you are held under temporary arrest for that much longer, for as long as it takes to review the temporary warrant, your temporary arrest period is suspended and it resumes again. So, for example, the temporary arrest would have actually expired had Yoon's team not made the challenge to the validity by 10:33 a.m. this morning. But because they did make the challenge, which was rejected, he's still held under this temporary arrest warrant.
Right.
So, yeah.
But to make sure, during the time that it was extended, he wasn't going under questioning, right?
No, I mean, he refused to be questioned in any case. He refused to
Right.
actually present himself to the CIO.
All right.
And yes.
Now, the court has decided to dismiss the challenge, the latest petition. And Mr. Hwang, what was the reason behind the court's dismissal of this petition, and what could this mean? Do you think Yoon's side would have expected such a result?
Well, they should have. I mean, the temporary arrest warrants were issued twice, but the first time around, CIO failed to really execute the warrant because the Presidential Security Service resisted really hard the first time around. And both times, actually, the President's Yoon's legal team challenged the legality, the jurisdiction of CIO, as well as legality of the warrant. So, and you know, the Western District Court have dismissed all those arguments. So now they turn to the Central District Court, trying to sort of, you know, get another bite at the apple. But the circumstances didn't really change. So it really didn't give any ground for Central District Court to actually say, hey, we're going to disagree with Western District Court. I mean, as far as the laws are concerned, as circumstances are concerned, everything stayed the same. So as predictably, the request was denied.
And just today, the CIO has sought an arrest warrant for Yoon just hours ago. Mr. Hwang, can you remind us of the legal requirements for filing an arrest warrant in Korea, and how is it different from the current temporary warrant imposed on Yoon?
Right, the temporary warrant was requested because President Yoon refused to cooperate with the investigation. The permanent arrest warrant version is usually to make sure that evidence is preserved and to reduce the flight risk of the suspect. Now, the fact that President Yoon was hauled up in the presidential residence is sort of like an escape in itself. So I think the CIO will be pretty successful in requesting the permanent arrest warrant. I mean, so far, there have been various challenges the President Yoon's legal team has made to the courts for various issues. They've lost them all. So I don't expect they're winning to start anytime soon.
What about Professor Cho? The ball is now handed over to the Seoul Western District Court. How do you forecast the arrest plans to proceed? We hear if the court gives the green light, he will be detained for questioning for about 20 days?
That's exactly right. So since they issued the request for the full arrest warrant this evening, I believe that the court will actually hold a hearing and look at whether to issue the full arrest warrant tomorrow. Although it's weekend, there is a judge on duty whose task is to look at these kind of warrants, and so they'll be looking at that. And as Mr. Hwang said, I believe that the court will issue it because Yoon has been completely uncooperative with investigation authorities so far, and it doesn't seem like he's changing while he's in custody. And certainly there doesn't seem to be a flight risk given that he is still the president. However, there is very real risk of destruction of evidence, and also a high likelihood that charges against him will be proven. So I believe that the court will issue the warrant.
So what's the key in for the court's decision? What are the key issues for the court to review of the arrest warrant, Professor Cho? So
the court only really looks at three things. First is whether the crime will be proven against the suspect. So in Yoon's case, whether these insurrection charges will be proven against him. And, you know, we've witnessed what happened on the 3rd of December, all of us with our own very eyes. Some of us were there on the scene at the National Assembly. And we know what happened. We saw the soldiers. We saw the the soldiers breaking into the National Assembly building, trying to stop the vote to withdraw the martial law declaration, etc., and also all the other information and facts that have come out ever since then. And so there is very strong likelihood that the charges against Yoon are likely to be proven. Whether he will also be charged with military treason is another issue. We don't know that yet, but the court doesn't really need to consider that yet. The other two factors are the flight risk. Once again, given that he is still the president, he hasn't been impeached yet, we can argue that there is low risk of him taking flight, but there is very strong and real risk of destruction of evidence on Yoon's part. So and given his uncooperative attitude with regard to the investigation so far, the court will most likely issue the warrant. Yoon is really not doing any service work to himself, because if he had cooperated and simply presented himself for questioning by the CIO in the first place and not resisted and not, basically argued the whole time that it's illegal and invalid, etc., then he could have simply attended this questioning and even attended the trial while staying and remaining at the presidential residence. But obviously, it's also part of his strategy and part of the show that he is resisting this with all his might, because he believes that this is all illegal, and it's probably also a boon and a burn for his supporters as well.
Right, so he definitely has something on his mind about this legal tactics. But the CIO is known to have filed for the warrant to formally arrest Yoon with the Seoul Western District Court, which is the same court that is filed for a temporary warrant for 48 hours. Meanwhile, President Yoon's legal team has maintained that such a process should be conducted through the Seoul Central District Court. Professor Cho, it's very confusing. Could you clarify for our viewers the reasons behind the two parties' preference for different courts, the Western Court and the Central Court? Is there any specific legal framework or rule that governs the choice of court in such matters?
Sure. It's really a question of jurisdiction of the courts. The basic rule is in criminal matters, the warrants are usually, the jurisdiction is actually with the court where the suspect is present or the crime has taken place. And in this case, because the president's residence is in Hannam-dong, which is within the jurisdiction of the Western District Court, that's why CIO, I believe, filed for the warrant with the Western District Court. Now, the Yoon's team's argument is because the CIO's location is actually within the jurisdiction of the Central District Court, they should have filed for the warrant with the Central District Court. But that really doesn't matter. And I believe that even if CIO had filed a warrant with the Central District Court, the Yoon's team would have then argued, well, no, you should have filed it with the Western District Court because Yoon's registered residence is within the jurisdiction of the Western District Court. So, I think it's clearly just another delaying tactic and obstruction tactic, and again, another strategy to basically incite and as a show for his supporters to let them know that the president believes this is all illegal and he's doing everything that he can to fight against this illegal execution of arrest warrants, etc., etc. So the rules are quite clear, and they've made this challenge numerous times, and every single time the court has rejected Yoon's team's argument and said that the temporary arrest warrants and other orders that have been made are completely valid and completely legal, and so there's really no argument here.
Right, so legally it doesn't really matter on which court they have filed this arrest warrants, right?
Well, initially it didn't matter, but technically I believe if the CIO now actually files with the Central District Court, then Yoon's team will certainly come back and say, you see, you also acknowledged that filing with the Western District Court was illegal, and so the original temporary arrest warrant was actually illegal. So this entire execution of warrant was illegal, and you'd better do this all over again because this is all illegal. I think that's the kind of strategy that they will be taking.
Okay, now let's turn into the impeachment trial. Thursday was the second formal hearing of the trial, and the Constitutional Court has rejected Yoon's request for a postponement. The trial has proceeded without Yoon's presence, and the court further designated some dates for future hearings too. Mr. Hwang, could you walk us through the developments at the trial?
I guess sort of one thing to keep in mind is that the overall legal strategy, or if there is one, of President Yoon's legal team, both in the impeachment trial as well as the criminal proceeding, is just to delay whatever methods that you use. I think Professor Cho kind of pointed out that, the President Yoon's legal team would have offered whatever legal arguments to just delay things, and I think that was really on the show on the second hearing that took place. Basically, some of the arguments that the President Yoon's lawyers are making really made a lot of people just wonder if the lawyers are truly serious about defending President Yoon. For example, one lawyer that just joined President Yoon's team basically said that Constitutional Court doesn't have the authority, doesn't have the information, doesn't have the competence to actually review President Yoon's decision to declare martial law. Now, when you're before the Constitutional Court, this is sounding very insulting, and it is probably not a very good idea to insult the Constitutional Court itself, but that's what President Yoon's lawyer did. So it is a little strange that they will actually take that kind of argument and actually present it as an oral argument. But I think what we are seeing is that they're just throwing everything they've got, no matter how outlandish that these arguments may sound, in order to just buy time for the time being.
Right, but the court has designated upcoming hearing dates already. It seems like they are willing to push through and proceed with the hearings. How long do you think it would take to come up with a conclusion, Professor Cho?
Yes, you're certainly right. The court is trying their best to ensure that the defendant, in this case Yoon, gets a proper opportunity to defend himself through his lawyers. But the lawyers are really not doing him any good. I mean, to me, they're doing him serious disservice because they're throwing just nonsensical arguments. And I listened to some of the arguments that were actually being made by the Yoon's defense team yesterday, and response by the courts. And I could see that the court was really trying to be very patient and trying to ensure that they did get the opportunity and sufficient time to make their arguments. But once they really, crossed the line and just started being completely nonsensical, they really sort of put a stop to it. And so they were almost like, a kindergarten teacher kind of dealing with unruly child. It was almost like this. So at yesterday's hearing, they set 3 more hearing dates, February 6th, 11th, and 13th. So the pace is about 2 hearings per week. And I think the court's expectation is that most of the substantive hearings will be over by that date. But I suspect that what will happen once February 16th or 13th comes around, Yoon's team might then argue that they would like to call additional witnesses and try to buy more time that way. But if we hark back to Park Geun-hye's impeachment trial, Park Geun-hye's defense team also tried the tactic of trying to call as many witnesses as they could. I think they submitted up to 50 witnesses list to the court, and the court accepted some, but they didn't accept all. And so I suspect that the court will also be taking similar line with Yoon's defense team, but their final card might be Yoon would like to give testimony himself and be present in the court directly, and then claim that he's ill or something on the last day and not turn up. But I think the court will come to a conclusion end of February, early March at the latest. That's the expected timeline.
All right. Thank you for giving us a time frame despite the uncertain situation. Professor Cho and Mr. Hwang, thank you so much for your insights tonight. I'm afraid we'll have to wrap up our discussion here. Thank you for joining us again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.